Thanks a lot. It's always fun to come here. Hey, how are you? Uh, I usually start out playing a song that I learned from my grandpa. He sang about three generations of children to sleep with this song. Um, I can even now I can see his silhouette in the window, sitting in the rocking chair, slapping his knee and singing "Cotton Eye Joe." This is from my grandpa. Cotton Eye Joe, Cotton Eye Joe. Where did you come from? Where did you go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe? Way down yonder, a long time ago, my daddy hired a man called Cotton Eye Joe. Flew into town on a traveling show. Nobody danced like Cotton Eye Joe. When we had a dance, all the women wanted to go. They all wanted to dance with Cotton Eye Joe. Even Mama at the window, Mama at the door, couldn't get her mind off Cotton Eye Joe. Cotton Eye Joe, Cotton Eye Joe. My daddy took a fiddle and I took the bow. We beat the hell out of Cotton Eye Joe. Cotton Eye Joe, Cotton Eye Joe. Where did you come from? Where did you go? Where did you come from, Cotton Eye Joe? Cotton Eye Joe. My grandpa was a tall man, about 6'4", and weighed about 110 pounds. My grandma used to say he could walk right through the crack in the door without even opening it. He was so thin. Had big ears. He looked like his lungs were transplanted to his head. But he was the knife holder in the family. He had a sharp pocket knife, and whenever we needed to cut anything, we'd go get Grandpa. He wouldn't let us use it, but he would come and cut about anything. And he cut ticks out of a dog's ears. He peeled apples for us kids with it, and cut his toenails. I mean, there were a lot of things he did with that pocket knife. And Grandpa always kept it sharp. He had an old stone that he kept it sharp on. And whenever we needed a knife, go get Grandpa. My grandma was very different. She was one of those hell and brimstone ladies. And she used to go after us. My gosh, she knew everything that God wanted. I think she must have had one of the early cell phones or something that she communicated with him. But I remember, God doesn't want you to chase the cow when it's pregnant. And for a bunch of boys, that was the funniest thing in the world, to see a cow run when it's pregnant. God doesn't want you to smoke in the hayloft. If it catches fire, you all burn up. And if you smoke in the hayloft, you'll burn in hell anyway. So And she was really tough about this, and we all knew that she knew what God wanted, so we sort of minded, at least when she was around. My grandfather was just the opposite. He used to say, "Boys, all you have to know is God is love. Everything else is just a lot of verbiage." And you know, I was 25 years old before I realized that they worshiped the same God, because I thought they had two different gods going for them. My grandpa had one, and she had the other one. Uh, but she was a country woman, and she wanted to be a dignified woman. And to her, being dignified meant that if a stranger came to the door, she had to have her shoes on before she answered the door. A real lady didn't go to the door with her shoes off. And my grandma hated shoes anyway, so whenever somebody came to the door, she had to rush around and find her shoes. And about once a month, the A&P man came around. The A&P man was the beginning of that A&P supermarket that they have in the South. He had a wagon with four mules pulling it, and it had all kinds of stuff, tea and coffee and even some of those wonder medicines that were nothing but alcohol and water. But anyway, when she heard that wagon coming up the gravel road, my grandma started looking for her shoes. She'd run around, and the wagon got closer, and you could hear his whip slamming on the mules' backs. He got up to the driveway, started up the driveway, long driveway up to the house, and my grandma almost panicked. "Oh, come on, children, help me find my shoes. Oh, Lordy, Lordy, where are my shoes?" He came right up to the back door, stopped his mules, put the reins over the pole on the wagon, started up to the house, and just at that point, my Uncle Pete, who was only 2 years older than I was, my Uncle Pete found her shoes. And she put them on, tied them up, and she went to the door, and she was a dignified lady when she opened the door. She was a dignified lady. She was the one who taught me how to play the harmonica. She really could play. But she only played hymns and gospels, and she made me promise. I don't know how she got this out of me, but she made me promise that I'd never play anything but hymns and gospels. And especially, she said, "Don't play that devil's music, the blues." Yes, Grandma, yes, Grandma. Well, you know, you don't tell a 10, 11-year-old boy not to do something, because that just blinks the green light, which says, go ahead and do it, see what it's like. But she would tolerate us going into town when there was going to be a medicine show there, because the people, very often there was a harmonica player with a jug band, and she would let us go listen to that. But when we got back, we pretty much had to cleanse our souls with something or other, castor oil or something, so we'd not catch anything that those blues men sang about. The jug bands were our best entertainment. There was one old black fellow, Peg-Leg Sam, he called himself. He lost his leg as a hobo, and he'd fallen under a train and lost it. While he was in the hospital, he carved himself a wooden leg, and he carved a cup on the bottom of it, so that when he played the harmonica, he had a percussion instrument. That thing was sucked down, boom, boom, boom. He was a one-man band, really. And when I heard that Pig Leg Sam was down in Crestwood, boy, I got on my running shoes and went to Crestwood as fast as I possibly could. I'll play you a jug band song. Oh, Angelina Baker Angelina Baker's gone. She left me here to shed a tear and beat on the old jawbone. Oh, Angelina Baker. Angelina Baker's gone. She left me here to shed a tear and beat on the old jawbone. I must have caused a great sensation the day that I was born. I grew up king of all creation, a hoeing in the corn. Oh, once I'd like working, then I'd sing happy all the day, till Angelina Baker came and stole my heart away. Oh, Angelina Baker. Angelina Baker's gone. She left me here to shed a tear and beat on the old jawbone. Angelina is so tall she's never seen the ground. She has to use a telescope to look down on the town. I don't know where to find her, 'cause I don't know where she's gone. She left me here to shed a tear and beat on the old jawbone. Angelina Baker. I'm going to play some blues songs farther down the playlist. But first, I think we ought to ensure the safety of you people. I'll have to play a hymn for my grandma, just in case, because we don't want lightning striking and earthquakes taking place and floods and all those other things that God wants when people play the blues. So we'll do a little gospel, and that will sort of calm the waters. This is for my grandma. My Lord, He calls me with the thunder. The trumpet sounds within my soul. I won't have long to stay here. Steal away, steal away, steal away to Jesus. Steal away home. I've not got long to stay here. That's for my grandma. It's almost embarrassing to say this, but it was my Aunt Virginia, my grandma's own daughter, who led us down the primrose path. She worked in Crestwood at the drugstore there. She had a little apartment there, and about every 2 weeks, my Uncle Pete, who was just a couple of years older than I was, would go over to her apartment and help her clean it up. Sometimes he was over there when she was working. and he discovered that under her couch was a stack of vinyl records. They were all blues. So he would put them on her Victrola, crank it up, and he would learn the blues, and he would come back, and that trio we had, we called it the Bad Band. My brother, my kid brother, who was 10 years old, I was 12, Pete was 14. We'd sneak off down by the creek to the ash grove where my grandma couldn't see or hear us, and we learned to play the blues. And Pete taught us. And it was my Aunt Virginia's fault. That's what I'm going to argue, at least, if I have to go to hell. That it was her fault that she should be in hell and not me. But anyway, we learned the blues. And this is the first blues I learned. It's called Minglewood Blues. I was born in the desert, I raised in a lion's den. I was born in the desert, I was raised in a lion's den. My favorite occupation, taking women away from their men. Oh, if you're ever down in Memphis, stay out of Minglewood. If you're ever down in Memphis, stay out of Minglewood. 'Cause the women in that place, they don't mean no man no good. Now, some of you might be wondering, what did a 10-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 14-year-old know about taking women away from their men? Of course, you know, we woke up with a fever and cried. Our moms got out of the bed, came over to take care of us. And what do we know about the women in Minglewood, Memphis? Absolutely zilch. Nothing. But there was one thing we did know. Whatever we were singing about, and we weren't sure what it was wicked. And that was fun. That was really fun. Oh, don't ever let a woman give you a worried mind. Oh, don't ever let a woman give you a worried mind. If you do, they'll run you ragged, keep you crazy all of the time. See, no lightning, no earthquake. See, told you that gospel helps. It sort of helps, really. Well, as some of you probably know, there was a Great Depression back then. And my dad was out of work for 7 years. He was out of work. By that I mean he didn't get a salary. His father came over from Belfast. His father was a distiller. I think he's the one who invented Murphy's Law, you know, if anything can go wrong, it will. Because he was a distiller in Belfast, and he was supposed to set up a distillery in Kentucky. He got here, and 2 months later, they passed Prohibition. And then the Depression came, and my dad was out of work, and so he and my grandpa started making moonshine. And I used to go over there. He had a big farm, and he had the bottom part of the silo was a false bottom, and he had a still in there. And at night he ran the still so you couldn't see the smoke. And I would go over there about the end of summer, and he would have this huge watermelon farm, and the watermelon would all be ripe. And he would take us out in the garden, and he'd take his pocket knife and cut a big hole in the watermelon, reach down, grab the heart, and give it to us. Eat it, boys, it's good. The heart's always good. And I used to think, my gosh, that's a real waste of watermelon, because he would put the watermelon down and plug in it and go to the next one. Take the heart out and give it to us. Well, later on, much later on, from my Uncle Jim, I learned that what my grandpa was doing, he would dig these big plugs into the watermelon, take the heart out, and then he would go into market. He'd put a pint mason jar full of moonshine whiskey down in the hole, put the plug back in, load up his wagon with watermelon, and sell it at the farmer's market. I thought that was pretty clever, but until I found that out, I thought that was a terrible waste of watermelon. But now I know why he did it. He was a very quiet guy. I think it was partly because he didn't want to say anything that would let his kids know what he was doing, because we might say something in front of the sheriff or the deputy or something. But anyway, we lived with my grandpa and grandpa for about 4 years during that Depression. And that was awful for my dad. I mean, here he was making moonshine, and my grandma was a member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. And so he was told about 8 times a day, and maybe more than that sometimes, that he was going to hell for making whiskey. Now, this is a little bit funny, because my grandma used to take Hadacol, which was they called an elixir. It was 50% alcohol. She didn't know that, and they didn't have to put it on the bottle then. And she said, I take it just because it makes me relax and feel so good after the end of the day. But here she was drinking Hadacol every evening and fussing at my dad and sending him to hell for making moonshine during the day. But anyway, right up the hill from us, right through Mr. Potts' cornfield, was a revival camp, a Christian revival camp. And in the fall and winter, there was nobody up there. There was a great big tabernacle, they called it, with a roof and no sides. And there were these little shacks all around. They were shacks with no heat, because people came there during the summer to a revival meeting, and they didn't need heat. But anyway, my dad talked the minister who owned that camp into letting us rent one of those shacks for the winter. He would promise that he would take care of the place, keep his eyes on it. I really loved it, because the place had a lot of nut trees. It had hickory nuts and walnut trees, and that meant that there was a lot of squirrels around. And I learned to shoot a rifle pretty well by the time I was 10 years old, and so I kept meat on the table during that winter by shooting squirrels with the help of Old Ace. Old Ace was a hound dog that belonged to my grandpa, and they got him as a pup. I was about 5 years old. I was a pup too, and we grew up together, and we learned how to hunt squirrels together. And he would see a squirrel and chase it up a tree, and if you've ever watched a squirrel, if you're walking towards it, he goes around on the other side of the tree. Well, Old Ace would go around on that side of the tree and raise a commotion, and the squirrel would come around on my side, and bam, I got him, or else I didn't get him. If I didn't get him, Ace would come around and look at me and get down on his haunches and look at me as if to say, you're not earning your meat for the day, buddy. Ace was my first love. I really fell in love with that dog. And when he came home one time, I guess I was about 14 then, a neighbor had shot him with a shotgun because he was molesting a cow that was having a calf, and he was dragging his intestines behind him, and they had to kill him. And I mourned for months because of that dog. I got a song here for old Ace. He's a good dog. I've had him for years. He used to stand up when I'd walk by. Now he just lifts up his ears. He thumps his tail on the floor when I talk to him. But if I talk too much, he just closes his eyes and goes to sleep again. But he don't bark at strangers, and he don't trace the cars, and he howls at the coyotes who are howling at the stars. He scratches on the back door till someone lets him in. Then he scratches on the other side to go back out again. He's a good dog. I got him as a pup. I tried to teach him all the tricks, but then I just gave up. He never seemed so very bright, but his eyes have a special glow. I think he thinks he knows some things that actually I don't. But he don't bark at strangers, and he don't chase the cars, and he howls at the coyotes who are howling at the stars. He scratches at the back door till someone lets him in. Then he scratches on the other side to go back out again. He's a good dog. But one of these days, gonna have to drive him into town and have him put away. He can't see or hear no more. He can hardly walk. But until that day, I'll look at him and say, he's a good dog. That's for old Ace. Well, in that camp, everything went all right during September, but about the latter part of October, these strange men started coming into the camp. And they went into the tabernacle there, and at night they'd build a fire, and they'd sit around and make something to eat. Sometimes they would sing, and you could hear them laughing over there. They were hobos. They were hobos. And hobos, I found out from them, were three different types of people. There were what you call, I guess, the upper class hobos. They were working men who were out of work, who were drifting around, trying to find work. Then there was a middle category they called tramps. That's what the hobos called them, tramps. These are guys who would work if they had to, but they preferred not to. And then at the bottom of the scale, they were bums. A bum was somebody who not only didn't work, but took pride in not working and making it on his own without working. And those three guys, they all lived together under this tabernacle during that year. Well, about the end of November, I guess it was, about 3 a.m. in the morning, we heard this loud sirens and screeching of brakes and then gunshot and everything. My dad got up, said, "Now you boys stay in here. There's shooting going on out there. I don't want you to get killed." So we peeked out the window and tried to see what was going on. My dad was out there about 20 minutes. He came in. He was laughing his head off. He said, "You know, the sheriff was here trying to drive those hobos away, and there was not one hobo in the whole camp. They had somehow gotten information that the sheriff was coming and had cleared out. You know, since then I've thought we ought to hire hobos for our CIA, since they don't seem to be able to get much information right anyway. And those hobos knew how to get it, and within a week, they had drifted back in, and they were back over there. And my brother and I, my dad said, "Don't do it," so that's why we did it. We went over to talk with them. And one day there was a hobo there. He took out his wallet and showed us a picture of a little boy. He said, "This is my son, Ted. He's 10 years old. He plays guitar." And my brother Bud, who was 10 years old and played the guitar, said, I play a guitar. And the hobo said, yeah? Yep. Well, go get it. And I said, I play a harmonica. He said, go get it. And we brought the instruments back, and we had a jam session right there under that tabernacle. And we even played the blues under there. Place didn't burn or anything. It's still intact when we got home. But we didn't say anything to anybody about it, of course, because we thought, well, you know, start bragging about that, and you never know what's going to hit you. Anyway, here's the song for the Hobos. Please tell me where have all the hobos gone to? I see no fires burning down by the rusty railroad track. Could it be that time has just gone past them? Waiting there with their hobos traveling sack. There was a time when lonely men did wander across this land, drifting aimlessly along. So many times I've heard their sad story, some written in the words of dead men's songs. That's for the hobos. Well, I got to say something about my Uncle Jim. He was the oldest uncle in the family. He was about 23 or so, I guess, when I got to know him. I was old enough to really know him. And I always considered him the smartest man in the family. And I would have said the world, but I couldn't think beyond Crestwood at that time. So I said the smartest man in Crestwood. He used to have a lot of sayings. Like one of them was, there ain't a horse that can't be throwed. I mean, it can't be rode. There ain't a cowboy that can't be throwed. Now, English teachers have a lot of trouble with the grammar there, but it's got a lot of wisdom behind it. Another thing he used to say, and think about this now. Think about it. He says, there's no failure like success. And I think of a lot of musicians I know who got to be very successful. And it was all the way down, all the way up. Well, anyway, the one I liked the most, because I got caught in it myself, he said, don't ever criticize a man for doing something harmless, because probably you're going to end up doing it yourself. That was my Uncle Jim. He was very important to me for a lot of reasons. But the most important thing was that he and his wife, Aunt Lorena, liked each other. Now, that might sound strange, but in those Depression days, it was hard for a husband and wife to like each other. Just forget love. I'm talking about liking each other. It was hard because whenever a dollar came into the house, there was always an argument. Should we spend the dollar paying the doctor bill? Should we pay some money on the grocery bill? Should we buy a pair of shoes for the kids? What should we do with the dollar? And there were lots of arguments about money and about why can't you find a job? You know, when there were 14 million men out of jobs, men and women out of jobs, why couldn't you find a job? Well, of course, they tried to find jobs and they couldn't. But anyway, my Uncle Jim and my Aunt Lorena liked each other. They did. You'd see them coming down from Potts's cornfield holding hands. And she would whisper in his ear and they would giggle. And I wondered, what in the devil do you suppose they're talking about to make them giggle like that? And one time, we were all around the table having supper, and I dropped a biscuit, and I leaned down, looked under the table, and there was my Aunt Lorena with her right leg over my Uncle Jim's left leg. And I thought, oh, my God, if Grandma sees that? God doesn't want women to do that to men. I knew that, but I didn't say anything. I didn't squeal on. But anyway, when I got to the age where I thought that I might get married, they were the only example I had of the possibility that marriage might turn out well. Everybody else lived together and hated each other. Well, Uncle Jim was the one who told me about Billy Benson. Billy Benson had no legs, and he had made himself a platform with roller skate wheels on the bottom of it, and he had a pair of leather gloves, and he rolled around on the Carmack at the railroad station practically all day long. And my brother Bud and I used to go down there, and we were a little afraid of Billy Benson because he was very gruff, and we didn't know quite what to make of him, really. But one day, my brother Bud was 2 years older than I was, and he wasn't embarrassed about asking any embarrassing questions. Billy Benson, he said, "What happened to your legs?" And Billy Benson said, "You want to know what happened to my legs?" And Bud said, "Yeah." "Well, I was down in Old Mexico, and I got in a fight with a tiger." Now, we didn't know that there were no tigers in Old Mexico, and I doubt if Billy Benson did either. But anyway, he said, "Tiger bit off both my legs." But Billy Benson was one of those people who always look on the bright side, and he said, "But wait, I bit off 4 of his legs." So when the fight was over, the score was 4-2, right, boys? Yeah, I reckon so. Reckon so. And he said, anyway, President Wilson said that war, the World War I, was the war to end all wars. And by God, if I have to give up 2 legs to end all wars, I won't mind doing it. Well, we thought very differently about Billy Benson. And sometimes when we would bring sandwiches into town, we'd go over to the railroad station and break off part of our sandwich and give it to Billy Benson. Or we'd steal some biscuits from my grandma and take them into Billy Benson. He was a nice guy after that, and we sort of liked him. But then, of course, just a few years after that, World War II began. I don't know what happened to Billy Benson. By the time that happened, we had sort of lost contact with Billy Benson. But anyway, I've got a song for him. Surprise, huh? Well, how do you do, Private Willie McBride? Do you mind if I sit here down by your graveside? I'll just rest a while in the warm summer sun. I've been walking all day and I'm just about done. I can tell by your gravestone you were only 19 when you joined the dead heroes of 1916. Well, I hope you died quick, and I hope you died clean. Or Willie McBride, was it slow and obscene? Did they beat the drum slowly? Did they sound the fife lowly? Did the rifles fire, oh ye, as they lowered you down? Did the bugles play last call in chorus? Did the pipes play the flowers of the forest? Now did you leave a wife or a sweetheart behind? In some loyal heart is your memory enshrined. And although you died back in 1916, in that faithful heart, are you always 19? Or are you a stranger without even a name, forever encased behind some glass pane, an old photograph torn and tattered and stained, and faded to yellow in a black leather frame? Now the sun's shining down in the green fields of France. A warm wind blows gently and the red poppies dance. The trenches have vanished long under the plow. No gas and no barbed wire, no guns firing now. But here in this graveyard it's still no man's land. Countless white crosses to man's shoulder now, to man's full indifference, to his fuller man, and a whole generation that was butchered and damned. Did they beat the drum slowly? Did they sound the fife lowly? Did the rifles fire, oh ye, as they lowered you down? Did the bugles play last post in chorus? Did the pipes play the flowers of the forest? Now I can't help but wonder, Private Willie McBride, did all those who lie here know why they died? Did they really believe it when they told you the cause? Did you really believe that that war would end wars? But the suffering, the sorrow, the glory, the shame, the killing, the dying, it was all in vain. For Willie McBride, it's all happened again, and again, and again, and again, and again. That's for Billy Benson. Well, it was the Second World War. I was 14 when it started. When I was 17, I joined up. But first of all, my Uncle Jim was taken. He was an automobile mechanic, and they needed automobile mechanics, of course, with all their Jeeps and trucks and things. And but he'd had an accident when he was working on an automobile. He had pushed his hand through a headlight and cut the ligaments in his wrist. And so when he got to basic training, he couldn't pull the trigger on a rifle because he just didn't have the ligaments to do it. So after about 2 months, they sent him back home. And I remember Uncle Jim sitting at the table there saying, "It's a good thing I came back. I don't think I could have brought myself to shoot anybody. I'm glad I came back." Well, the next uncle was Uncle George. And Uncle George was a fighter. Uncle George would fight over anything, or even nothing. When the 1937 flood hit Louisville, there was a radio announcement after the flood went down that if you have a truck and some shovels, you can come up to Louisville and shovel muck into your truck and dump it somewhere, and they would pay you $3 a day. So my Uncle George had a truck and some shovels, and he asked me, I was 14 then, no, I was 11. I was 11 years old then. He said, you want to come up to Louisville with me? I'll give you 50 cents a day to help me shovel muck. Now, I didn't know he was getting $3 a day from me, but anyway, we went up there and we shoveled muck day after day. But every day, we'd stop in this tavern to have lunch. And my Uncle George would be there. We'd sit up at the bar. If the guy next to him didn't pay any attention to him, my Uncle George would elbow him and say, what's the matter, don't you like me? And then there'd be a fight. If the guy looked at him too long, my Uncle George said, what are you looking at? You see something you don't like? And there'd be a fight. It got to the point where I wouldn't go in with him. I'd sit in the truck and eat sandwiches my mom had made for me. And pretty soon, he'd be in there about 20 minutes, and he'd come out. He'd been in another fight. And one day I said, George, why are you doing that, Uncle George? You're not winning, you know. You're just losing a lot of blood. He said, I don't know. He said, but sometimes I think if I don't get into a fight, my head will explode. Now, the Army made a real mistake with my Uncle George. Here was a fighter. If they had gotten some small biplane, loaded him up with ammunition and several guns, parachuted him off from one of those islands that was occupied by the Japanese, he could have cleaned up probably in 3 or 4 days, and they could have sent him to another island. But no, the Army was known for its snafu. I won't tell you what snafu means. It's not nice. But anyway, they sent him out here to Seattle. And if you know anything about the history of warfare, you know that when soldiers or fighters go into a situation where they're not used to the enemy's weapons, they have a pretty bad time. Well, my Uncle George came out here to Seattle, and the Seattle boys had a secret weapon. It was a beer bottle. You know, it had a nice handle. You could bang with it. You could poke with it. Uncle George didn't know how to use a beer bottle because they drank out of mason jars, and you couldn't grab a mason jar and hit anybody in the head with that. It wouldn't work. They bit and kicked and things like that. Well, anyway, he got into a fight in a bar in Seattle. They fractured his skull. They had to put a steel plate in his skull. They sent him back home. There was my second uncle back home. Then it was time for my Uncle Pete. He was just 2 years older than I was. And he played the dulcimer and the guitar in our trio, a bad band we call it. And he joined the Navy. Well, that broke up the band. And Pete went off to the Navy, and my brother Bud and I tried to get along. But my brother Bud had perfect pitch, and I don't have. Now, if you think it's hard living, try having a younger brother who sings with you, and he has perfect pitch and you don't. You know, he'd stop in the middle of the song and he'd say, are we singing the same song? Or he would say, where in the hell did you get that note? And it was awful. It was terrible. So the band sort of fell apart, really, after my Uncle Pete left. I began to think, as I was 16 and then 17, that I would join up too. Now, if I were dishonest, and I'm an Irishman, and as you know, they're all honest. If I were dishonest, I'd say I joined up because my two uncles couldn't serve and I did. That wouldn't be true. I joined up for the same reason that a lot of guys joined up, and that is I had been thrown over by the woman I loved. Her name was Nell Anderson. She was 3 years older than I was. She was the prettiest woman in Crestwood, and every man there loved her. And that was my second big love. The hound dog was the first, and Nell was the second. One day I decided I was going to declare my love, so I stood outside the drugstore. I had a piece of chalk. She was in there slurping up something or other, I don't know what, soda, maybe. And on the sidewalk in front of the drugstore, I put OTM, Orville Theodore Murphy, plus N.A., Nell Anderson. And I folded my arms and stood there and waited for her to come out. Well, she came out. She walked down the steps. She looked at and then she looked at me, and she looked at it again, and she looked at me with the most fantastic contempt I ever saw. And she said, "The N is upside down." I didn't know that N's could be upside down. You make them this way, you make them that way. It doesn't make any difference. But it made a difference to her. And let me tell you, it broke my heart. It really broke my heart. For days, I just moped around. My grandpa was the first one who noticed it. And he took me aside one day, put his hand on my shoulder, said, "Boy, let me tell you something. In all my long years, I've never seen a young man die because a woman threw him over." I said, "But Grandpa, there are a lot of songs about that." "Yeah," I said, "but those are just songs, you know. Songwriters are romantic. It's hard for them to stick to reality." Didn't help a bit. Didn't help a bit. So one day my Uncle Jim was riding into LaGrange, and he said, "Boy, you want to ride in with me?" And I said, "Yeah." And we rode into LaGrange. He went somewhere. I don't know what he was going to do, but I was walking down the street, and I came to this Navy recruiting station. And I was looking at all these pictures of these sailors dressed in these handsome hats with sea bags on their shoulder and women all around them. And the Navy recruiter walked out the door. He said, "Howdy?" And I said, "Howdy." He said, "How you doing?" I said, "Well, not so good." He said, "I bet it's a woman." And I said, "Yep, it's a woman." He said, "You know, there are at least a half a dozen men come in here every week with that same problem. You want to get even?" I said, "Yeah." "Join up." He said, "You join up, and as soon as you're shipped out, the women come in here. They're crying like babies. Bring him back. I didn't mean to have him go join the Navy. If he's killed, I'll never forget it. I'll be guilty all my life." I tell him, "Can't help it. Can't help it. He's signed up. He's gone." Well, I said, "Yeah, that would get even, wouldn't it?" He said, "Yep. Come on in. There's a little paperwork to do." When I came out, I had joined the United States Navy for patriotic reasons. Okay, Grandma, here's another blues song. My love's gone cold, rain all in my soul. My love's gone cold, rain all in my soul. I believe it's time, I believe it's time to go. Rain on my shoulder, rain running down my nose. Rain on my shoulder, rain running down my nose. My blues are on me, they will not let me be. My blues are on me, they will not let me be. If I leave this way, what's to become of me? Yep, I was in the United States Navy. The day I was supposed to catch a bus to go up to Louisville to be mustered in, my Uncle Jim took me aside and he said, "Boy, I got to talk to you." I said, "Okay, Uncle Jim, what do you got to say?" "Stand up close to the urinals." "What?" "Stand up close to the urinals." Now that just shows you how observant my Uncle Jim was. He was right. When I went in the men's room there in the railroad station, I always stood very close to the urinals. And the reason why was because when I was a kid, I was in there doing my business. My Uncle George sneaked up behind me, pulled that lever down, and that thing went, and I was sure I was going to get sucked right down through that hole. So from then on, I stood close to the urinals. And my Uncle Jim said, "That's what you got to do." I said, "How come, Uncle Jim? I do it already." He said, "Because if you stand back, you're going to splash on some man who's got a crease in his pants or his shoes shined. And he's going to pull out a 38 special and let you have it." Well, now I had to laugh. You know, what man would wear pants with a crease in them? Or a pair of shoes that were shined? I mean, didn't he have to walk in the mud to go down and feed the pigs? Didn't he have to go get the cow out in the pasture and step in cow manure? I mean, for God's sake, wear shoes? Must be crazy. Well, I went into Louisville, and while I had 2 days there, and I was walking around, I went into a men's room in a place, and sure enough, right next to me was this guy with a pair of pants with a crease in them, and his shoes shined. Yep, his shoes were shined, just like a mirror almost. Well, from then on, I was very careful. Went to the Navy up in New York at the boot camp up in Sampson, New York. And about the 3rd week we were there, this guy came in with a shoe polish kit. He said, "Everybody, listen up. I'm going to teach you how to shine your shoes." He gave us all a rag and some shoe polish and a brush. And we learned all the steps for shining your shoes. You know, you put a little polish on, you spit on it, you rub it with a brush, you spit on it again, you take a rag and you shine it. You put some more polish on, you spit on it, you brush it, you spit on it again, you take a rag and you shine it. We worked there for about 45 minutes. And he said, "Okay, everybody's shoes ought to be shined now. Next Monday, the commander's going to inspect every one of you. And if there's one man here who doesn't have his shoes shined right, you're not going to get any leave when the boot camp is over." Well, boy, let me tell you, we shined like the devil. And when boot camp was over, I stopped off in Chicago and went into a men's room. And some guy came up close to me and didn't stand close to the urinal and splashed all over my shoes. If I'd had a 38 special, I certainly would have given it to him. And just like my Uncle Jim said, don't ever criticize a man who does something that's harmless, because you might end up doing it yourself. And that was my introduction to the U.S. Navy. Time for me to take a break. I'll come back, finish this story about how I won the war almost single-handedly. Luann, would you help me down here? Hold my hand. Spoil this.
I said, no matter the town, you know the blues are waiting there. I said, I said, I said, I said, I said, and I've been to the ocean, I heard that breaking sun. Walk all day in the desert, Lord, and I slept on the cold ground. Gambled in England, gambled in Spain. Wherever I've gone, you know the blues, they'll run the game. I said, I said, I said, I said, I said. I drank that holy water, I dined with the devil too. There's cat hair in the coffee, Lord, and dark blood in the stew. I met me some fine people, I met some evil men, but the meanest thing that I've seen was cruel, cruel rain and wind. I said, I said, I said, I said. Now I'll tell you, child, my dying has come. So hear these words I tell you, I beg, hear everyone. You can have my mouth, he don't mind the taste of gin. The cripple, he can have my legs if he don't mind where I've been. The bald, he can have the hair on my head, he can have each one for free. The blind can have my eyes if he don't mind what I've seen. I said, I said, I said, this kind of wondrous lullaby, the song he sings walking down the road. Wheels blowing old cobblestones, the wagon rolling down. Oh, how I long to go to that seaport town. Build me a home out timber strong, overlook the bay. Build me a home out timber strong, quit my driftwood way. Oh, the winding road, I've seen many places fair, but oh, the winding road, would you ever take me there? Apples on the summer tree, the wagon rolling down. Oh, how I long to go to that seaport town. Give me a job with my two hands, work near every day. Come on home to a fire warm with a little honest pay. Oh, the winding road, I've seen many places fair. Oh, the winding road, would you ever take me there? Setting sun and a lonesome bird, the wagon rolling down. Oh, how I long to go to that seaport town. Sea breeze and the bright blue sky, sailors' faces grin. Sunshine in my true love's hair as all the ships come in. Moonlight on the water and some footsteps in the sand. Well, that's me and my darling gal, we're walking hand in hand. Oh, the winding road, places fair. Oh, the winding road, would you ever take me there? Baby with his mother's eyes, sleeping in his bed. Laughter in the next room, oh, with no trouble or worrying. So wheels blown on cobblestone, the wagon rolling down. Oh, how long ago to that seaport town. Watch the time as it drifts by, heading out to sea. Till my hair's as gray as the fog on a bay, grandchildren on my knee. I said, oh, the winding road, to see many places fair. Oh, the winding road, would you ever take me there? I said, oh, the winding road, to see many places fair. Oh, the winding road, would you ever take me there? I said, oh, the winding road, would you ever take me there? No more, no more, my troubles are over. I'm following that star, and its light will guide this night and lead me to the shore. No more, my troubles are over. The wind, it knows my name, and its voice as clear as the morning air. Love's no regret or blame. And ships may sing, well, the wise men change seas, but I will try and be true. Lonesome's just a word as the candle burns. All time